something your family did every year, but you now realize was to cover something up? So every year since I was like 5 years old, my family would have this super weird tradition we called Ancestor Day. I never questioned it growing up because you know how it is with family traditions. You just accept them as normal even when they're not. For Ancestor Day, my mom, dad, older brother Shane, and I would all pile into our car on the first Saturday of October and drive exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes to this tiny town called Millfield. The town literally had one traffic light and a population of maybe 500 people tops. We'd check into the same motel every year, which honestly was kind of gross with these faded green carpets that definitely had seen better days. But my parents insisted we had to stay there. No exceptions. Ever. The next morning, we'd all dress in these matching dark blue outfits and drive to this little cemetery at the edge of town. My parents would lay flowers on this random grave, someone named Elizabeth Keller, not real name, and we'd all stand there in silence for exactly 10 minutes. Then my dad would say, "We remember," and we'd all have to repeat it. After that, the rest of the day was actually pretty fun. We'd go to this little diner in town for breakfast, then spend the day doing random touristy stuff. Then we'd drive home Sunday evening. As a kid, I just accepted that Elizabeth must have been some distant relative, even though my parents were super vague whenever I asked questions. They'd just say stuff like, "It's important to remember where we came from," or "family connections matter," and change the subject. Fast forward to me being 17, and I got super into genealogy for a school project. I was making this whole family tree and interviewing relatives and going through old records. I asked my parents about Elizabeth Keller, thinking I could add her to my project. The way they reacted was weird AF. My mom got all pale and my dad immediately started talking about something completely different. But 17-year-old me was not about to drop it. I started digging. First, I called my grandma, dad's mom, and casually asked about Elizabeth Keller. She had no idea who I was talking about. Same with my mom's parents. None of our extended family had ever heard of her. So then I started researching online. I found Elizabeth Keller's death record, but there was literally nothing connecting her to our family. Different maiden name, different birthplace, nothing. The next Ancestor Day, I paid more attention. I noticed how my parents seemed super tense the whole drive there. After we visited the grave, I snuck back to the cemetery while everyone was getting ready at the motel. I took pictures of Elizabeth's gravestone and the ones around it, thinking maybe there were other family members buried nearby that would explain the connection. When I got back, my parents were freaking out because I disappeared. My dad was angrier than I'd ever seen him, and he's not usually the angry type. He kept saying, "You can't wander off here of all places," which made zero sense to me at the time. The next few years, I was away at college during Ancestor Day, and my parents didn't make me come home for it. But I kept researching whenever I had time. Then last year, my grandpa, dad's dad, got really sick. I went to visit him in the hospital, and while we were alone, I decided to ask him about Elizabeth Keller again. He was on a lot of medication and probably didn't fully realize what he was saying. He looked confused and said, "Who? Oh, the Millfield thing. That's not about any Elizabeth." Then he started dozing off, but I pressed him. I asked what it was about then. He mumbled something about, "Your dad's accident," before falling asleep. What accident? My dad had never mentioned any accident. I went home and confronted my mom when my dad wasn't around. I told her everything I knew and demanded answers. She looked terrified but finally said, "Ask your father." So I did. I cornered him that night and refused to leave until he told me the truth. At first, he tried to stick to the Elizabeth Keller story, but when I mentioned what Grandpa said about an accident, he just deflated. Like all the fight went out of him at once. We sat down at the kitchen table, and he called my mom and Shane to join us. The story came out in pieces, with all three of them filling in different parts. When my dad was 19, he and some friends were driving through Millfield after a party. They'd all been drinking. My dad was driving. There was an accident. They hit another car. A woman died. Elizabeth Keller. My dad panicked and fled the scene. His friends covered for him, saying someone else had been driving. There wasn't enough evidence to charge anyone, and the case eventually went cold. But my dad couldn't live with the guilt. When he met my mom a few years later, he confessed everything to her. They decided that every year, on the anniversary of the accident, they would go to Elizabeth's grave as a way for my dad to face what he'd done. As Shane and I were born, they kept up the tradition but disguised it as Ancestor Day, a way to pay respects without telling us the truth. The dark blue clothes were because that was what Elizabeth had been wearing when she died.